All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we are on the home stretch of session 4, the art and science of facilitation questions. We're going into the last module, facilitating participants' questions. So let's do a quick review of where we've been and where we're going. We used a volleyball analogy early in the session. We asked the question, in what way is facilitating questions a bit like a volleyball game? And as you know, we used your ideas to develop an analogy. Marty pointed out that they're both games of strategy, and that's particularly true. For the types of questions, we examined open-ended, closed-ended questions, and we said that you can choose to serve a volleyball underhand or overhand, and just as you can do that, you might choose an open or a closed-ended question. It just really depends on how broad or narrow you care to make it. And then we said that just like in volleyball, when you serve the ball, you can choose to direct that ball to an individual or the group at large. And we did an exercise where you chose the best question and how to direct it based on a virtual classroom scenario. There are numerous categories of shots in volleyball. Just as you can choose to set up the ball or lob or spike it, the category of question from which you draw depends on what you want to see happen on the other side of the net. So it definitely is a game of strategy. And last but not least, acknowledging responses. That's what we just finished doing. How you handle the ball when it's in play is a whole other discipline, as we've seen. Sometimes it goes where it's supposed to, but sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes it gets fumbled or lands out of bounds or it gets dropped. And so we did an activity around that as well. Up to now, we've been talking about the proverbial balls that you serve over the net to the participants, the discussion questions you ask, how you stimulate discussion and get people to think and reflect and learn. Now what we're going to do is talk about when the participants initiate a question to you. That takes us to our first question in this module. When a participant asks a question, as a virtual instructor, what are your response options?
I think that it's always best to answer it if you can on your own, but not to be scared of saying that you'll just defer to somebody that's more of an expert on it. One thing I've always found that's really annoying that are professionals of all types, I mean, whether it's a mechanic or a computer repairman who, when you ask them something, they answer it whether they know it or not, as if they're supposed to give you an answer. Like they're going to lose your confidence if they don't give you an answer. When really the most confident people are the ones who say every once in a while, I don't know.
It takes us back to what we covered in session 2 around how does the virtual instructor establish and maintain credibility.
Yeah, I mean, it also it's a way of building confidence too, because we're all human and we don't know everything at all times. So I think it's important, in my experience, to defer.
I think a good way to do that, too, is to take it offline and make a note to yourself to make sure to get back to the person.
Yes, absolutely. And you can redirect it to the group, meaning, hey, I don't know, what do you guys think? Where it's just like a volleyball serve. You're not aiming it at one specific person. You're just kicking it out to see what they think. Another redirect option is, hey, Judy, you've had some experience with this. What do you think? And deferring, as all of you have said in one way or another, to a different person. And that really supports that whole learning community. And what Marty's talking about with, why does the virtual instructor have to be the only all-knowing expert? It's a knowledge construction process, meaning that all of us scaffold on each other's knowledge. And it requires us to defer to one another. Another option you've got, again, is if there's a known expert in the room, if you have a panelist who's specifically there to share the wealth of knowledge and experience they have, by all means, let's use them. Deferring until later, I heard that come up, and absolutely that's an option. Can anybody, and feel free to type this into chat, or raise your hand and we'll talk about it. When might you choose to defer it until later, meaning postpone the answer of a question?
How about if the question is actually pertinent to what we're going to discuss, and it would be sort of not right to bring the topic up at this particular point in time, but to bring it up later on down the line.
Excellent. Thank you, Rick. You're all professional instructors. You've had occasion when somebody asks a great question, but you're going to really go there in depth in the agenda in just 10 minutes. So it would make sense to ask permission to hold that thought until we get there. And there are a variety of gracious ways you can do that. And that really brings us to our last option, which we like to call take it offline. And that's where it's just so out of scope, or we just don't have time to address it at all. You've got all of these options, so it kind of begs the question, well, which one do you pick? Other than just the intuitive way that most of us have come up through the ranks as trainers, is you do it by intuition. And the reason we've called this session the art and science of facilitating questions is that there is a bit of a scientific side to it, and we're going to go there in just a second. So taking it back to our volleyball analogy, if you think about it, okay, somebody's across the net. They just lob the ball, nice overhand serve to your side of the net. As a virtual instructor, your tendency might be, as that ball is hurtling towards you, you got to think pretty quickly. Do I punt it back? Do I pass the ball to somebody else? Do I let it drop? What do I do? Whatever you do, you got to think really quickly. So 3 best practices that I'd like to share with you. One is, consider as that ball is getting launched, what's behind this question? Why is this question being asked? Is it politically motivated? Or is it based on the material being covered? Is it based on their needing or wanting to understand better? So it's which Bloom's taxonomy level is being reflected, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Knowing what Bloom's level is behind the question will help inform the next 2 choices, which are when the question should be answered, now or later or never, and who should answer it. Should it be me? Should it be somebody else? So we touched on Bloom's taxonomy in the pre-work, and we explored it earlier in the session. Let's talk about it in the context of participants who ask questions. Typically, we use Bloom's taxonomy, and I know from when we did the poll earlier, many of you said you primarily use Bloom's taxonomy when you're crafting exam questions. But the point I want to make is that Bloom's taxonomy can also be very helpful in helping you figure out what order of thinking your participant is operating from. These questions on the right-hand column in blue are the phrases that you will get based on the level of Bloom's taxonomy, the level of cognition that your participant is operating from. So, for example, if a participant asks, where's the raise hand icon? That tells you the basic knowledge and familiarity with the tool is just coming up. So if you start asking questions like, how would you innovate using the WebEx tool, there's going to be a readiness problem. Do you think that Bloom's taxonomy can actually be helpful to you as you're trying to answer the question, why is this question being asked?
Bloom is a very important tool for anybody to really intricately understand, because of the fact that any one of these particular questions should be categorized quickly in your mind. So being familiar with Bloom's is probably of pretty high importance.
Absolutely. What do the rest of you think?
I agree with Rick, and I also think it'll take a lot of practice. I tend to either filter the questions coming at me as, okay, do you need to know something or do you need to do something, which falls into both ends of the spectrum of the taxonomy. But I tend not to think about, okay, is this a question, are they trying to synthesize something? Is this an application question? I think it'll just take time before I learn how to do that.
As we use that volleyball analogy, that ball comes at you really quickly. So you're right that it takes deliberate, conscious practice to identify the Bloom's level in the question. I've also found it helpful to just, think in terms of a graphic image, and that's why I'm sharing this diamond with you. It can sometimes be helpful when you're facilitating virtual sessions because no one knows what you have posted in your cubicle or in your area. So you can have something like this to help cue you so that you can categorize the Bloom's level as questions are being asked. Now, let me ask you a question. If most of your group is asking lower-level questions, where's this, what do you mean by that, and one participant asks you an evaluation question, they're like way ahead of the pack up here, what do you do with that question? Do you answer it? Do you defer it? Do you redirect it? What are your thoughts? Feel free to type some responses in your chat space. So we've got a couple things on the board here. We've got Patrick saying, spend a bit more time with the lower. Yeah, that's a choice you could make. And Judy has said, use the star performer as a resource. Excellent. And David's saying, hold the question until more people reach that point. We got 3 different people with 3 different pieces of advice. Is there room for more than one approach? What do you think? Go ahead and raise your hand.
I don't think there's a rule book, especially since every class is different every time.
Speaking to what Judy wrote, utilize the star performer as a resource. I think that's a great way to approach an advanced question.
The only clearly risky response option would be to kick it out to the group. Here's where we're going to go after this. Who should address the question? Which option do you think most instructors in corporate America tend to choose when a participant asks a question?
I would say definitely most trainers would pick to answer it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you.
It begs the question, why do so many instructors tend to knee-jerk, automatically answer the question directly instead of giving someone else a shot at the ball? So going back to the volleyball analogy, it would be tantamount to diving for every shot that comes across the net, even when someone else is right there and skilled and ready to return the ball. I invite you to look at the 9 potential reasons that are colored on that screen. And what I'd like you to do is go up and click your cursor on this arrow tool, and then click next to the reason you think is the biggest reason why trainers tend to do this. So we've got David saying, well, it's probably a time issue. We've got Marty saying because they believe that participants really expect them to play that role. Then we've got Judy and Ray saying, well, maybe it's just because we don't know the benefit. So, David, let's start with you. Why do you think it's fundamentally a time management issue?
I think that most facilitators in a virtual environment are really concerned about their schedules. It's one of the reasons they try and control the conversation, and one of the easiest ways to control the conversation is give people the information and also give them the answers to their questions really quick.
Now, Marty, you said you believe trainers do it because they think that that's what participants expect them to do. Say a little bit more about that.
I think it might be a little bit also of being themselves as an expert.
I think control for many facilitators is kind of wrapped up in the identity of what it means to be the instructor.
It goes back to that whole industrial age model of the trainer as authority figure. And, of course, one of the reasons for this whole certification process is to help us move past that institutional learning model so that we're more of a guide on the side versus the sage on the stage. I think most instructors operate from a sense of responsibility and wanting to do the right thing. And so controlling the process and being the expert in the resource is something that may be rooted in a sense of responsibility and doing the right thing, but by a very different set of rules about what doing it right means in the 21st century. Redirecting questions supports adult learning theory. And so let's take a quick minute, go back to the very first session we had together where we really explored adult learning theory. And let me ask you to do this. Knowing what you know about adult learning theory, how does redirecting questions support and help foster adult learning principles? Ooh, I like that one. Encourages people to debate and challenge. Ooh, I like this one. Drops the barrier between the facilitator and the group. Adults validate information against their own experience. So redirecting it and deferring to them gives them a chance to share that experience. Ooh, this is good. People learn best by doing. Yeah, huge principle. Redirecting helps to foster the learning community in many, many ways. So the more bouncing that ball around we can do and getting as many players involved in handling that ball as possible, the richer the learning. So here's what you're going to do. Each of you will take a quick turn fielding participant questions. You must respond to those questions using a variety of choices. So you can choose these 5. There's one thing you cannot do, and that is answer it. Don't personally answer any questions, but do provide a brief rationale for why you're giving them the response that you are. So, who's got a question?
What kind of barriers are there with these virtual classrooms?
You know, that's a great question, too, and I would probably refer that back to our expert, Ray, on this case, because she has the most experience.
Good question. I have some thoughts, but before I weigh in, let's open it up to the group.
Is there a web platform for virtual meetings and this kind of environments? Is there a better one than WebEx?
I'm actually going to open up to the floor to see if anybody can help me out with this.
Very nice. In its own weird way, sometimes you become more credible for admitting, I actually am not the best person to ask. I really don't know. Does anybody here have that answer? It's a nice way of deferring to the learning community. Very nice. David, did you have something that you wanted to ask?
I just wanted to comment on what you just said. It's especially true because every time you're in a class, there's always questions that are asked that you can never anticipate. So there's no way to completely study and become the expert anyway, so there's no point trying to make believe that you are the expert.
You don't know where that ball is going to dart. It can move very quickly, and it can take a different trajectory based on who's launching it, who's touched it, where it's gone. But if you can keep it bouncing meaningfully, you can balance the participation, and you can ultimately deploy your strategy to advance learning and make sure that people are all a robust part of the learning process, then everybody wins that game. In this session, we explored a lot. We started off with questioning as a core facilitation skill. Together, we built the volleyball analogy. We examined, just like you would choose a type of serve, we talked about open and closed-ended questions to narrow or expand the scope of discussion. We talked about how you direct your shots. Do you spike it, lob it to an individual, or do you just let the group go for it? Acknowledging responses, that was a very spirited discussion and activity. And of course, we just spent our time on how do you return the serve when a participant lobs the question over. There's a whole host of choices in decision-making. But I think all of you have gotten really wonderful insights into the dialogue, and you've demonstrated through the skill drill that you can make other choices. You don't have to indulge in that pitfall that comes so naturally to trainers where we fall into the expert role. Last question before we conclude and you go back into the asynchronous learning forum. This is what we call the meta-learning moment. This is learning about learning through the learning process. What stands out to you about the art and science of effective facilitation questions?
I'd really like to get that taxonomy embedded in my brain. I think I'm going to make a picture of it and just have it up in my office here.
That sounds really great. What else? What will you do more of, less of, or differently?
I think I'll defer a little bit more to the participants.
Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for your participation and for making the session what it is. Your insight and your personal experiences and the way that you extended one another's thinking is really what cultivates a learning community. So thanks again for another terrific session, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Here's a little bit of homework for next time, and we'll see you in the asynchronous chat space, which, as you know, I'll be moderating in between sessions. And then next Monday is our next synchronous session. So thank you so much.